Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we step into 10 true wilderness horror stories where the forest doesn't just surround you, it watches. A ranger found an elk hanging 30 feet up, no tracks, no explanation. A church that vanished except in dreams. Whispers on an untouched radio. Floating lights and eyeless faces behind them. And a closet hatch that knew your name. These aren't just stories of being alone. They're about what's out there listening. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Elk Hanging from the Pines. It started with a drop of something wet hitting the back of my neck. I reached up thinking it was sap or morning dew, but when I looked at my fingers, they were streaked in blood. I froze, heart racing, scanning the treetops above me. That's when I saw it, the twisted carcass of a full-grown elk hanging 30 feet up. Limbs bent backward like snapped branches, as if something had crushed it and placed it there. Deliberately. I was deep in the Cascade Mountains that morning, walking a forgotten fire road just past Skookum Creek, an old patrol route I used to take during my years as a forest ranger. Retired now, I still hike the same paths out of habit, craving the solitude and silence most folks find unsettling. It was late September, the kind of crisp morning where every pine needle smells sharper and the ground is soft with the last of the summer's decay. No wind, just the distant call of a jay and the crunch of gravel under my boots. This part of the forest hadn't seen visitors in months. The trees leaned in overhead like old sentinels, and I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, clean, untouched. I had no cell signal, no GPS, just my compass, my thermos, and the weight of memory. But standing beneath that bleeding elk, the woods suddenly felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy. Before that moment, everything had felt perfectly normal. I'd brewed coffee over a camp stove just after dawn, leaning against the tailgate of my truck, watching the mist rise between the trees like breath. I'd seen a rabbit dart across the trail, fresh scat from a bear, maybe a day old, and a tangle of deer tracks by a dry creek bed, signs of a healthy living forest. I even stopped to sketch a woodpecker I'd spotted on a cedar stump just for old time's sake. The day was unfolding like dozens before it, quiet and meditative. I was walking slowly, scanning the underbrush for mushrooms I might gather on the way back. That's when I felt the drop on my neck. Just one moment, one sound, and everything shifted. Up until then, the woods had felt familiar, almost sacred. But when I looked up and saw that elk, it was like the trees had turned against me, and I was suddenly very, very small. The elk didn't just look dead, it looked staged. Its body was mangled in ways I'd never seen, and I've seen my share of cougar kills, bear maulings, even lightning strikes. But this was different. Its legs were bent backward at the joints. Bones snapped clean and twisted like straw. The rib cage split open, but not torn, almost surgically opened. Flesh hung in strips, but no scavenger had been added. And the most disturbing part, there were no signs of struggle. No broken branches beneath it. No drag marks. No blood trail. Just a single sticky drop that had landed on me and that grotesque thing suspended 30 feet up in a lodgepole pine, with no low branches to climb. My flashlight cut through the morning mist as I scanned the base of the tree. Nothing. The bark was untouched. No claw marks, no scrapes. Whatever had put it there hadn't climbed. It had placed it, or worse, thrown it. The silence grew louder, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Even the birds had gone still. I took one cautious step back, suddenly aware of every crackling leaf underfoot. A shiver ran through me, the kind that comes not from cold, but from the primal sense that you're being watched. I stood frozen beneath that pine for what felt like hours, though it was likely no more than a minute or two. My instincts screamed at me to leave, But some old ranger habit kicked in. I had to document it. I slowly raised my phone, snapped a few shaky pictures, then turned and walked, never once looking back. My camp was about a mile off, and I made it in half that time. I didn't speak to anyone until the following day, when I convinced a local deputy and a buddy from Search and Rescue to come out with me. We left at dawn, hiked straight to the site. But when we arrived, there was nothing. No elk, no blood, not even the branch where it had been caught. The tree stood tall and clean, like nothing had ever touched it. I pulled out my phone, heart pounding, ready to show them the photos, but the image file was corrupted, not missing, just black. Every single one. Except for a short, strange video I had no memory of recording. It was 18 minutes of pitch black footage with a faint, ambient rustling sound in the background. But about 6 minutes in, there's movement in the bottom left corner. 2 amber points of light flicker, slowly blinking in sync. Eyes, watching, blinking, unmoving. My buddy said it was probably a bear, but I've never known a bear to sit that still that long. And no bear could have done what I saw. Whatever it was, it hadn't just killed that elk. It had arranged it for me. I stopped hiking that trail after that day. In fact, I stopped going into the backcountry alone altogether. Something about the silence out there feels different now, less peaceful, more alert, like it's listening. I deleted the video, but not before watching it a dozen times, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. The weight of those blinking eyes pressed into my chest every time I closed my own. Whatever lives out there isn't just surviving, it's aware. And I think it wanted me to see. A few weeks later, I found something taped to my front gate, a single photograph printed in grainy black and white. It showed the same tree, the same branch, and the elk hanging there, just as I'd seen it. Only this time, I wasn't alone in the frame. In the corner, partly hidden in shadow, was a tall, thin figure watching me from the tree line. And it was smiling. Story 2. The church that wasn't there. It was supposed to be a quick weekend hike, just me, the trees, and a break from work. But somewhere off a side trail in the Ozarks, I found a building that shouldn't have existed. Nestled in a clearing too perfect to be natural, stood a stone church intact, unweathered, untouched by time. No graffiti, no rot, not even moss on the roof. Just smooth stone, clean windows, and a heavy oak door that opened without a sound. I stepped inside, and I swear to you, the air changed, like I'd crossed into something else. I'd set out early that morning from a trailhead near Ponca, Arkansas, deep in the Ozark National Forest. It was early October, and the trees were just starting to bleed gold and amber, the air cool enough to see my breath. I'd been on that trail before Lost Valley, a quiet, winding route that follows a creek and leads to a bluff. But about 2 miles in, I spotted a faint path veering off to the left, barely visible under fallen leaves and brush. It looked like a deer trail, but something about it pulled at me. I pushed through brambles, climbed over a rotting log, and followed it for maybe 15 minutes. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birdsong, no wind, just this pressing stillness. Then the woods opened up, and I saw it tucked between the trees, like it had always been there. A full-sized church in the middle of nowhere, perfectly preserved. At first, I convinced myself it had to be some old church left behind by a settlement, maybe part of a ghost town I'd never heard of. The place looked solid. The roof was intact, shingles neatly in place. The windows were clear, uncracked, and the wooden door, though heavy, swung open without a creak. Inside, it was quiet. Dust hung in beams of light, filtering through stained glass, casting soft reds and blues across the floor. The pews were arranged in perfect rows. At the front stood a simple altar, and behind it, a large leather-bound book. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and dry stone, not rot or mold like you'd expect from an abandoned building in the woods. There was no graffiti, no trash, no signs of anyone squatting. Just stillness. For a moment, I even felt calm, like I'd stumbled onto a forgotten piece of history. Something sacred. Something waiting. I approached the altar curious about the book. It wasn't a Bible. The cover was black cracked with age and bore no title, only a strange symbol embossed in faded silver, a circle intersected by jagged lines like spider legs. When I opened it, the pages were thick and yellowed, filled with writing I couldn't place. Not Latin, not Greek. The letters were sharp and chaotic, almost carved into the page rather than written. I flipped through a few more symbols, diagrams, and what looked like star charts mixed with unsettling sketches of twisted figures kneeling beneath towering shapes. My stomach turned. Then I noticed the walls. What I'd thought were decorative carvings weren't crosses. They were more of the same symbols etched into the stone itself. Some looked fresh, like they'd been recently cut. That's when the feeling hit me, the electric, full-body prickle of being watched. I turned sharply. No one. But the air was heavy now, thick with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. I backed away from the altar, slow and deliberate, trying not to make a sound. Then from the far corner behind the last row of pews came the faintest creak of wood. Just once. And then silence. I didn't wait to find out what made that sound. I spun and moved fast, nearly stumbling over the pews as I made my way to the door. Every instinct I had screamed to get out. But when I reached for the handle, the door was already ajar open, just enough to show the clearing outside, still and empty. I stepped through it and closed it behind me, not bothering to look back. The air outside felt thinner, like coming up for breath after being underwater. I pushed back through the brush, retracing my steps, breaking branches to mark my way. I didn't stop until I hit the main trail again. I took a photo of the coordinates on my phone and made my way back to the trailhead in silence. That night, I reported the building to the local ranger station. They logged it, said it was probably an old backwoods church from a logging settlement or mining town. Plenty of those out there, the ranger shrugged. We get reports like that now and then. Most are just ruins. But I knew what I saw. That building wasn't decaying. It wasn't forgotten. It felt active, maintained, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. I still had the photo with the coordinates. I went back a week later, this time with a friend. We followed the exact same path. Same break in the trail, same hike time. But the clearing, it was gone. Nothing but dense forest, no church, no trail, no sign it was ever there. After that day, I started dreaming about the church. It always appeared the same, tucked in the woods, bathed in strange light, silent and waiting. But in the dreams, I wasn't alone. There were people inside, dozens of them, all sitting motionless in the pews, heads bowed, chanting. I couldn't understand the words at first, but over time the sounds began to make sense. Familiar syllables, phrases I didn't know I knew. I started writing them down in the dark, waking up in a cold sweat. One night, I found myself standing outside on my porch barefoot, repeating the words aloud with no memory of how I got there. I hadn't sleepwalked in decades. Since then, I don't hike alone. I don't sleep deeply. And I don't speak those words anymore, not even in dreams. About a month later, I woke up to find something strange on my nightstand. There was a single page torn from a book, thick, yellowed parchment covered in the same jagged script I'd seen in that church. The ink was still fresh smudged near the corner like it had been handled. My door had been locked. The windows, too. I live alone. I burned the page in my kitchen sink, watched the flames curl the edges, but the smell it released wasn't smoke, it was wax and stone, and something older, like damp earth sealed in a crypt. That night, I heard chanting again, except it wasn't in a dream. It was coming from the woods behind my house, low and rhythmic, like a service in session. I haven't gone outside after dark since, and I never will. Story 3. The Whispering Camp. We were 2 weeks into a logging contract deep in the Bitterroot Range, clearing fire-damaged timber where no one had worked in years. It was remote quiet and brutally cold at night, but we were used to that. What we weren't used to was finding a fire pit still warm with half-burnt food scraps and a half-empty thermos sitting beside it. No one was supposed to be up there. No hikers, no hunters. The road in had been cleared by our crew, so whoever left that camp had come through the woods, or never left at all. The work site was carved into a scorched section of forest that had burned the summer before, blackened trunks, ash-covered soil, and silence thick as snow. We were stationed nearly 30 miles from the nearest ranger outpost, reachable only by a winding dirt road we'd spent the first 4 days clearing ourselves. No cell signal, no traffic, no locals, just us, a battered RV, and 2 diesel-powered tree harvesters parked beneath skeletal pines. My partner, Vince, and I were seasoned cutters. We'd done jobs in Idaho, Alaska, even the Yukon. Isolation didn't scare us. We actually preferred it. The quiet helped us focus. Days were long, 16 to 18 hours of running saws and machinery. Nights were spent nursing sore muscles, eating canned chili, and listening to static-laced radio chatter that barely reached beyond our camp. It was routine. Grueling, yes, but reliable. Until that morning when we found the campfire. Vince nearly tripped over it on the way to warm up the harvester. The ashes were still glowing heat, radiating off the stones. The prints around it were scattered uneven, like someone had left in a hurry or had been watching us and vanished the second we woke up. At first, we tried to brush it off. Maybe a hiker got lost and stumbled through unlikely, but possible. We covered the fire pit, kicked dirt over the prints, and got to work like always. The machines roared to life, chewing through charred trees like paper. By midday, the hum of chainsaws and diesel engines drowned out any lingering nerves. Vince cracked jokes over lunch, and I remember thinking maybe we were overreacting. The forest, as eerie as it was, felt empty again. That night, we made our usual dinner beans jerky and lukewarm, instant coffee, and sat by our own fire trading stories. The stars were out clear and sharp above the burned canopy. No sounds but the occasional snap from the fire and the whisper of wind through dead branches. We slept in shifts like always. I took the first watch eyes, scanning the tree line, listening to the forest breathe. Nothing moved. No more footprints. No voices. Just the quiet we'd come to know. The calm before something changed. It started with the radios. The next afternoon, as I was cutting down a charred cedar, I heard a crackle in my headset. At first, I thought it was Vince checking in, but the voice that followed wasn't his. It was faint, barely audible over the static, but it sounded like 2 people whispering low and fast, just beyond understanding. I stopped the saw and pulled off my helmet. The voices faded. When I asked Vince if he'd said anything, he just shook his head. We changed frequencies, thinking maybe it was bleed over from another crew, though we knew damn well there weren't any others for miles. but the voices followed us. Later that evening, the whispers came back, this time clearer. One said something about gathering before sundown, and the other complained about the noise from our machines. Vince and I sat in the RV, listening hands hovering near the radio knobs, chilled by something that had nothing to do with the mountain air. That night, I found something half buried behind our work trailer, a dented coffee can filled with trash bones, and a few worn scraps of cloth, child-sized. We didn't speak much after that. The forest around us felt tighter somehow, like it was closing in. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind sounded deliberate, like someone or something was watching us work. We started locking the RV door at night, something we'd never bothered with before. And neither of us slept more than a couple hours. We kept the lights on, but the whispers always found their way in. The breaking point came 4 nights later. I was jolted awake by the sound of metal scraping beneath the RV, followed by a slow, deliberate tapping on the door. Vince sat up at the same time I did, eyes wide hand, already reaching for the crowbar we kept by the kitchenette. We stayed frozen for a moment, listening. Then came the sound of something brushing along the side of the vehicle. Not an animal. Too slow, too deliberate. I reached for the radio and whispered, "Is anyone out there?" The only reply was static, and then unmistakably a laugh. Not loud, not amused, just wrong. Vince mouthed, "Someone's out there." He grabbed the flashlight, and I opened the curtain just enough to see movement, a figure stepping just out of the beam, vanishing behind the equipment trailer. I flung open the door, heart pounding, and stepped out into the cold with my flashlight and crowbar raised. That's when I saw the blood. A thin smear across the harvester's blade, a handprint on the cab window. Vince followed me out, and together we circled the trailer. No one. But footsteps led into the trees, fresh in the frost-bare feet. We didn't follow. We went back in, locked the door, and stayed up until daylight. When the sun finally crested the ridge, we ventured out again. The blood was gone. The footprints were gone. But someone had left something behind. Propped against the harvester was a rusted handsaw. Duct tape wrapped around the handle, and tied to the blade was a photograph, creased wet but still visible. A picture of 2 men eating by a fire. Vince and me, taken from the woods. We packed up that same afternoon. Didn't wait for the foreman. Didn't file a report. Just loaded our gear, locked the machines, and drove until we saw power lines again. Vince didn't say much during the ride, just kept looking out the window like he expected someone or something to be following us. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was squatters. Some off-grid survivalists trying to scare us off. But deep down, I knew better. Those voices weren't echoes, and that photograph hadn't been taken by accident. A week later, we got word that another crew had gone up to finish the job. They were delayed. One of the guys, a younger cutter named Keegan, went missing the first night. They found his body 3 days later in a dry creek bed a mile from camp. Bound, gagged, and nearly decapitated. No tracks, no suspects, just silence. I never worked another mountain job after that. Vince didn't either. 3 months later, I got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single cassette tape and a note that just said, "You left something behind." I dug out an old player and hit play. For the first few minutes, it was just static. Then came the voices, those same whispers, clearer now. 2 men talking low. One says they'll come back eventually. The other replies, "Next time we keep them." The tape clicked off. I threw it in the fire that night. But sometimes when the wind's just right, I still hear them. Story 4. the rock thrower in Redwood Canyon. The first rock hit my back tire hard enough to knock me off balance. I looked up thinking it was a prank, maybe kids messing around, but there was no one on the trail. Just the trees, still and towering. Then another one came bigger, faster, landing inches from my front wheel. I wasn't near any campsites. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. It was late afternoon in Redwood Canyon, a lesser-known trail near Humboldt County where I'd been biking since I was 12. Now 17, I knew every bend, every route, every dip in the path. It was the kind of place that always felt safe, quiet, shaded with the sunlight, filtering down in golden slants through trees as wide as trucks. I had left the main loop to take an old fire road that cut through the deeper part of the forest, past the edge of Yurok tribal land. Not many people came out this way, especially on weekdays. No cars in the lot when I arrived, no hikers on the trail. Just me, my gear, and the silence that grows heavier the deeper you ride. I was about 10 miles in when the first rock hit. At first I figured maybe something had fallen from the ridge. But then the second one came from the opposite direction, and I knew it wasn't nature. Something was aiming. Before the rocks, it had been the perfect ride. The kind of late autumn afternoon that made the whole forest feel like a painting cool air, no wind, and that earthy smell of damp leaves and redwood bark. I'd packed light, just my water bottle, a protein bar, and my GoPro mounted on my helmet, rolling quietly the whole time. I wasn't rushing, just cruising, letting the trail flow beneath me. I passed a few deer, not far from the old ranger marker, and even stopped to snap a photo of a huge set of elk tracks near a muddy patch. It felt like any other solo ride, peaceful routine. The kind of day where you start to forget the outside world exists. I wasn't even listening to music, just letting the silence keep me company. That's what made it worse. Because when the first sound finally broke, that silence, a sudden thwack against the trail, I knew immediately it didn't belong. I dismounted fast dart, already pounding. The second rock had landed too cleanly, too straight. It hadn't rolled, it had been thrown. I scanned the ridge above me, then the tree line behind, but there was nothing. No rustling leaves, no snapped branches. Just the creeping sense that I wasn't alone anymore. I stepped off the trail slowly, trying to listen, trying to find a voice or breath or anything human. But all I heard was that thick silence again. Then from farther up the hill came a low grunt, not like a bear or deer. This was deeper, throatier, closer to speech than growl. That's when I saw it. A shape half hidden behind a fallen log about 20 yards up the slope, broad, dark, and still. I thought it might be a person until it moved slowly, almost deliberately rising just enough to show its height. Taller than any man I'd ever seen and covered in thick, matted hair. My breath caught. I fumbled for my phone but couldn't look away. It was watching me. Curious, not afraid. Just waiting, like it was deciding something. I didn't wait to see what it decided. I grabbed my bike and bolted, pedaling harder than I ever had in my life. I didn't care about the narrow turns or the routes I normally dodged with ease. I just rode, tearing down that trail like something was breathing down my neck. Behind me, I could hear the thump of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, not running, but following. Like it knew I wouldn't get far. Just as I rounded a curve near the old ranger marker, another rock, bigger this time, crashed through the branches above and slammed into the trail ahead of me, sending up a spray of dirt and bark. I swerved and nearly lost control, but somehow stayed upright, adrenaline doing the steering. I didn't stop until I burst out of the forest and into the gravel parking lot, lungs heaving, legs shaking. My car was the only one there. I tossed my bike in the back and sped out, tires kicking up dust. That night, I reviewed the GoPro footage, hands trembling as I fast-forwarded through the ride. Most of it was the usual trail trees silence until I paused on a single frame. Just before the first rock hit, something crossed the path far behind me. A figure. Tall, dark, and massive. But that wasn't what made me freeze. It was the second frame taken seconds later, where a man stood on the opposite ridge facing the creature. Not running, not afraid. Just watching it. Watching me. I sent the footage to a friend of mine. He's part Yurok and knows the land better than anyone. He watched it twice, then called me without saying a word. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. That trail cuts through old ground, places we don't go. Not because of superstition, because we remember. He wouldn't say more. I haven't ridden that route again, and I never will. A few times since I've driven past the trailhead just to see. And once near dusk, I spotted a man standing at the tree line. Same place, same posture, like he was still watching. Last week, I finally worked up the nerve to rewatch the footage one more time, frame by frame. I paused on that figure in the trees, the tall one. As I adjusted the contrast, something flickered in the shadows behind it. A second set of eyes, lower, closer to the ground, watching both of us. And just for a moment they blinked, in perfect sync with the first figure. I deleted the video right then. But now every time I pass that canyon, I feel them. Not just one, two. And I think they remember me. Story 5. The Night Lights in Pisgah. We thought they were fireflies at first, soft orange lights flickering across the creek just past our tent. My girlfriend even laughed, said it was romantic. But fireflies don't move in perfect circles. And they don't hover 10 feet off the ground, blinking in unison like some silent signal. We sat frozen, watching them dance through the trees, too smooth, too controlled. I reached for my phone to record, but the screen stayed black. Dead. That's when we realized the forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, just lights and the waiting dark. We were camping deep in Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina, near a lesser-known stretch of trail just off Black Balsam Road. It was early November, and the woods were quiet with the onset of colder nights. We'd hiked in about 5 miles, far enough to avoid the weekend crowd, but not so far that we couldn't hike back in a day. Our campsite sat beside a narrow bend in the creek, shielded by tall rhododendrons and oak. It was the kind of place that felt hidden, peaceful, untouched. We'd pitched the tent by late afternoon, made dinner over a small fire, and had just zipped into our sleeping bags when the lights appeared. At first, I thought it might be distant headlamps from other hikers, but no one else was out there. We hadn't seen a single person on the trail all day, and those lights, too high for flashlights, too still for drones, floated just above the treetops, pulsing like breath. Earlier that day had been picture perfect. Crisp mountain air, golden leaves crunching beneath our boots, and the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you've stepped out of time. We'd spent the afternoon collecting kindling boiling coffee on our camp stove and lying on a blanket by the creek, listening to the water slide over smooth stone. Ava had her journal out, sketching trees while I napped beside her. There was no cell reception, which we welcomed, no buzzing distractions, just us and the forest. We'd eaten dehydrated chili and split a chocolate bar by the fire as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The only unusual thing we noticed then was how quickly the night fell, like someone had dropped a curtain over the sky. But we thought nothing of it. After all, the mountains played tricks with light. We zipped up the tent, drifted towards sleep, and told ourselves we were safe. We always had been. Until the lights came. The lights didn't just flicker, they moved with intention. 5 or 6 of them glowing amber like dying coals gliding silently through the trees across the creek. Ava sat up first, peeking through the mesh of the tent, her breath caught mid-sentence. "They're not bugs," she whispered. I unzipped the flaps slowly, careful not to make noise, and peered out. The lights floated in a loose formation, drifting above the water without disturbing the surface. No hum of engines, no rustle of movement, just that unnatural pulsing glow. Then, as if reacting to our gaze, the lights shifted, rearranging into a perfect line. One by one, they blinked out, only to reappear farther down the creek. Closer. Ava grabbed my arm. Her voice shook. "Did you hear that I listened?" Nothing. Then from behind the tent a twig snapped. Not an animal. Too clean. Too close. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but when I clicked it on, the beam died instantly, like the batteries had been drained. Every piece of gear we had, phones, lantern, headlamp, dead. I felt a rising tightness in my chest. The fire just minutes before crackling strong was now cold ash. No smoke, no glow. Like it had never been lit. I looked at Ava, her eyes wide and unblinking, and whispered the only thing that came to mind: "We need to move." That's when the lights reappeared, and this time on our side of the creek. We didn't wait. I grabbed our emergency pack, just water, a knife, and a backup flare, and pulled Ava to her feet. We slipped out of the tent and into the brush, moving low, quiet, trying to keep the creek to our left. The lights pulsed between the trees, never rushing, never blinking out completely, just following. One of them passed less than 10 feet away, floating between the trunks, casting an eerie glow across the bark. There was no source, no bulb, no heat, just light like a will-o'-the-wisp that had learned how to breathe. We didn't speak. We didn't run. Running felt wrong, like it would trigger something we couldn't undo. Then we heard footsteps, deliberate and heavy, parallel to us in the dark. Not animal. Human. Maybe. Ava squeezed my hand so hard it went numb. I turned toward the sound with the flare in my other hand, ready to strike it when we saw them. 4 figures standing across the creek, each holding one of the lights in outstretched palms. But their faces there were no faces. Just smooth, pale skin eyes, sunken or absent heads tilted as if curious or waiting. One of them stepped forward and raised its arm palm open like it was offering the light. I struck the flare. A hiss of red smoke filled the air. When it cleared, they were gone. No lights, no figures. Just the creek and the dark woods staring back. We didn't go back to camp. We left everything tent stove, even our phones, and hiked through the night with only the fading flare and moonlight to guide us. The trail seemed longer, unfamiliar somehow, like the forest had shifted. Every so often we'd hear something behind us, soft footfalls, the faint sound of rushing water where there shouldn't be any. At dawn, we reached the gravel lot, our car untouched windows fogged over. Ava didn't say a word the entire drive back. When we returned, days later with a ranger, the site was exactly as we left it, except the tent had been collapsed, carefully folded, and placed in the center of the clearing. Inside was our dead lantern, and tucked beside it my phone, fully charged. The last photo in the gallery, us, sleeping in the tent taken from just outside the mesh. I tried to show the ranger the photo, but it was gone, replaced by a black screen with a single pulsing orange dot in the center. I deleted it, reset the phone, even changed devices. It always came back. Ava refuses to talk about that night. She won't hike anymore, won't even camp in the backyard. Sometimes when the house is quiet and the lights are low, I'll catch her staring out the window toward the woods behind our property. Once I asked her what she was looking for. She didn't answer, just pointed at the tree line and whispered, "They remember." That night I saw the dot return this time, glowing faintly on our living room wall with no device nearby. Just light, waiting. Story 6. Drowned by the river. I woke up weightless. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming until icy water soaked through my sleeping bag, and the sound of rushing current filled my ears. The gravel bar I'd pitched my tent on the night before was gone, swallowed by the river. My gear was floating, the tent was collapsing, and the soft, peaceful stream I'd fallen asleep beside had turned into a roaring wall of water. I was alone, half submerged, and the river was still rising. It was supposed to be a solo weekend reset, just me, my pack, and the Tocoa River in northern Georgia. I'd hiked in along a well-worn trail and found a flat stretch of gravel beside the water, just upstream from a bend where the river narrowed and deepened. It was early spring, and the forecast called for clear skies, no rain, no storms. The river had been calm when I arrived, barely ankle-deep in some places. I'd pitched my tent close to the bank, cooked a simple meal on my camp stove, and watched the sunset stain the sky orange through the trees. No cell service out there, which was the point. I'd left my phone off, wanting a true disconnect. Just firelight and the sound of flowing water to lull me to sleep. I never heard any rain, no thunder, no warning, just sleep, and then the flood. That first day had been everything I wanted, quiet, slow, grounded. I spent the afternoon walking barefoot in the shallows, skipping stones, and scribbling in my journal. I boiled instant coffee over the fire, leaned back against a driftwood log, and listened to birdsong echoing through the river valley. A pair of otters even surfaced midstream, chirping and tumbling through the current, like kids at play. I felt at peace, more than I had in months. No traffic, no emails, no noise. Just the steady rhythm of nature around me. As dusk settled in, I gathered more wood, stoked the fire higher, and watched sparks drift into the dark. My tent was dry, the stars were bright, and the air held the earthy scent of moss and pine. Everything felt safe, untouched. I zipped into my sleeping bag with a full belly and a quiet mind. I didn't even dream. I just drifted until the river woke me. At first, I thought I'd rolled into the creek in my sleep. Disoriented, half asleep, I thrashed against the wet nylon of my tent until I realized the water wasn't just inside, it was everywhere. I unzipped the flap, an icy current rushed in, soaking my legs. Outside, the gravel bar was gone. The river had swelled at least 3 feet fast and silent. No rain, no wind, just a surge like something had broken upstream. I grabbed my headlamp and pack, but the lamp flickered and died after a few seconds. My flashlight, same thing. Both batteries had been fully charged. That's when I noticed something worse. Floating just beyond the trees were objects plastic wood canvas, but not mine. A cooler, a child's shoe, a waterlogged tent torn down the middle. The river carried them slowly past, like offerings. Then I heard a low sound, almost a voice rising over the current. Not words, more like a chant, rhythmic and cold. I turned to look upstream and saw movement, dark shapes standing knee-deep in the water, perfectly still. I blinked. They were gone, but the river kept rising, and I suddenly knew I wasn't supposed to be there. Something was reclaiming the shore. I fought the current as best I could, dragging my half-soaked pack through the swirling water, my boots slipping on the invisible stones beneath. The river was up to my thighs now, cold enough to burn. Trees groaned as the flood pulled at their roots. I looked for the trailhead, but the bank had changed, washed out, rearranged, as if the forest no longer wanted me to find my way. Then I saw them again, not in the water this time, But along the opposite shore, figures tall and unmoving, like silhouettes cut from the dark. They didn't wade or drift. They just appeared step by step, standing on land that hadn't been there before. One lifted an arm and pointed directly at me. The chant returned clearer now, a guttural rhythm that matched the pulse pounding in my ears. I stumbled back, nearly falling, when my boot struck something buried in the silt. I reached down and pulled up a strip of faded canvas. A tent, molded and torn at seams, frayed with age. Beneath it, the corner of a blue backpack exactly like mine. Identical. Even the keychain, a little brass whistle my dad gave me when I was 10. My hands shook. My name was still stitched inside the strap. But I had never been here before. At least not that I remembered. Behind me, the chant stopped. Everything went still, river wind, even my own breath. Then the whisper came so close, it felt like it was inside my head. You came back late. And the water rushed in again, faster, deeper pulling. I woke up at dawn, sprawled on the dry trail above the river bend, clothes-soaked skin, ice-cold pack still clutched in my arms. The river had receded calm again, like nothing had happened. My tent and gear were gone, no trace they'd ever been there. But in my pack was the whistle. Not my current one, the old scratched-up one I lost as a kid on a family trip near this same river. I hadn't seen it in over 15 years. I checked the stitching on the strap. My name was still there. But the handwriting wasn't mine. It was my father's. He died 10 years ago. A week later, I developed the film from a disposable camera I didn't remember packing. Most of the shots were black, water-blurred or warped by moisture, except one. It showed me asleep in my tent, taken from across the river. In the corner of the frame stood a man, waist-deep in water, staring at the camera. His face was pale eyes, hollow, and he held something in his hand, my childhood whistle. I hadn't blown it since I was 10, but I still hear it sometimes, just before I dream of drowning. Story 7. The Man in the Closet Loft. It started with the thumping, soft rhythmic, like someone pacing in the attic above my bedroom. The thing is, my apartment didn't have an attic. Just a weird little crawl space above the closet, barely big enough to store a suitcase. I figured it was old pipes or maybe raccoons in the walls. But one night around 2 a.m., I heard a voice low, gravelly, and right above my bed. It said my name, just once, like a reminder. When I opened the closet door, the thumping stopped. I had just moved into the place 2 weeks prior, a small studio apartment in an old brownstone outside Chicago, the kind of building with warped floorboards, creaky doors, and charm that masked years of neglect. The rent was cheap, and the landlord seemed in a hurry to fill it, barely glancing at my application before handing over the keys. The closet was strange from the beginning. It had a high ceiling, much higher than the rest of the unit, with a wooden hatch about 10 feet up. No ladder, no markings, just a square panel flush with the drywall. When I'd asked about it, the landlord brushed it off. Just old storage space, he said. Nobody's used it in years. I didn't think much of it until the thumping began. Always after midnight, always from above. I'd knock on the ceiling and it would stop for a while, like whatever was up there knew I was listening. But then it would start again. Faster, closer. I thought about calling pest control, but something deep in my gut told me it wasn't an animal. It felt deliberate, like someone was waiting for me to notice. The days were normal enough. I worked remotely, drank too much coffee, took walks around the block to clear my head. The apartment had good light during the day, and I'd started to settle in, framed some posters, cooked real meals, even started sleeping better. The noises at night felt like stress, maybe my mind adjusting to the creaks and groans of an old building. I told myself it was just insulation shifting or pipes cooling down. Every time I passed the closet, I glanced at that hatch but never bothered with it. I didn't even own a ladder tall enough to reach. I'd put in earplugs, turn on white noise, and drift off. It worked, for a while. I even started to feel silly for being spooked. The closet door stayed shut. The thumping stopped for 3 nights straight. And just when I thought things had gone back to normal, I woke up one morning to find the closet door wide open and muddy handprints on the inside wall, child-sized, but spaced like they came from someone crawling downward. I stared at those handprints for a long time. They weren't smudges, they were pressed into the drywall like someone had leaned on it with their full weight. 5 distinct fingers streaked with something dark that smelled faintly of damp soil. I scrubbed the wall clean and tried to shake it off. Maybe I touched something in my sleep. Maybe it was dust. Maybe anything that didn't mean someone or something was in my apartment. That night, I locked the closet door and propped a chair beneath the handle. I even stacked a few cans in front of it, figuring I'd hear them fall if the door moved. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a soft knock, not at the front door. From inside the closet, just 2 taps, then silence. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, the can still upright, the chair untouched. I waited. Nothing. I tried to go back to sleep, but as I turned on my side, I heard it again, scratching light, deliberate like nails dragging slowly across wood. I turned on every light and stayed up until dawn. The next morning, when I checked the closet, the hatch was ajar, tilted just an inch open, enough to see dark space behind it. And hanging from the edge was a torn scrap of flannel, the same pattern as the shirt I lost years ago. One I hadn't owned since I was a kid. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I borrowed a ladder from the maintenance closet downstairs and propped it against the inside of the closet wall heart, hammering the whole time. The hatch was light, cheap plywood and swung upward with an eerie creak that echoed through the apartment. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, barely 3 feet high, thick with dust and old insulation. My flashlight flickered as I pushed my head through the opening. The air was stale like damp cardboard and mold. But what made me freeze wasn't the smell, it was what I saw tucked into the corner. A small pile of objects, buttons, broken toys, an old pair of glasses with one cracked lens, and a Polaroid photo so faded I almost missed the details. It was a child me standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, holding a flannel shirt, smiling. On the back, written in a shaky hand, was a date, June 12th of 1999. The day I went missing for 6 hours during a family camping trip. My parents never got an answer. I remember nothing. But the shirt in the photo was the same one that had been hanging from the hatch. Then came the sound, shifting in the crawl space behind the insulation. A soft inhale like someone waking up. I backed down fast, slammed the hatch shut, and nailed it closed. But before I climbed off the ladder, I heard one final whisper from the darkness above, "Found you again." I moved out the next day, left the key in the mailbox, and didn't look back. I didn't tell the landlord. What could I say? That something from my childhood was living in the walls, that it remembered me when I didn't even remember it. Weeks later, I got a package. No return address. Inside was the Polaroid photo, now pristine, like it had never aged. But the image had changed. The background was still that strange house, but this time, I wasn't alone. Standing behind me was a man in shadows, face hidden, one hand resting on my shoulder. His other hand held a nail, the same kind I'd used to seal the hatch. That night I nailed my closet shut too, just in case. Last week I got curious, stupid I know. I searched public records trying to find out more about the brownstone. Nothing came up under the building's address, but when I dug deeper, I found something odd. Back in 1999, a maintenance worker had gone missing during repairs in that exact unit. Vanished. No break-in, no struggle. Just gone. His name, Matthew Connors. The same name written on the inside collar of the flannel shirt I found. I hadn't noticed it before. The handwriting matched the back of the photo. That night, I dreamed of the loft again, except this time I was inside it. Knees pressed to my chest, surrounded by those toys staring out through the hatch at my own room. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. And just before I woke, I saw someone climbing the ladder toward me, wearing my face. I jolted upright, heart racing. The closet door was wide open, the hatch nailed shut, but on my pillow was a fresh Polaroid, me sleeping, taken from above, and scrawled on the back in that same jagged hand, now you remember. Story 8. The hollow where she lay. They told us not to camp near the hollow. Locals called it the sighing pit, said the ground there never quite dried, and the wind made a sound like crying. We laughed it off, urban legend stuff, and set up our tents just a few yards from the edge. That night around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of a girl softly singing. No one else stirred. I stepped outside and the air was ice cold. In the moonlight, I saw footprints bare wet and leading straight into the hollow where nothing should have lived. We were deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a spot we found through a backpackers forum off-trail, rarely visited, perfect for a quiet weekend escape. The hike in took most of the day winding through moss-covered ridges and under low-hanging branches that looked like they hadn't been disturbed in years. The hollow lay just beyond a natural clearing, surrounded by leaning pines and dense ferns. It dipped sharply in the center where a shallow depression held black, muddy water that never reflected the sky. Locals warned that animals avoided it, that birds refused to nest in the trees nearby. But to us, it looked like any other overgrown pocket of forest. We set up camp on slightly higher ground, just far enough to avoid the damp, but close enough to feel like we were thumbing our noses at the folklore. As night fell, the woods grew silent, eerily so. No crickets, no owls, just wind brushing through the branches, and the faint, breathy sound of water shifting in the dark pit. The first evening passed uneventfully. We built a fire, cooked foil-wrapped meals, and passed around a dented flask of bourbon while laughing about ghost stories. The hollow seemed harmless in the firelight, just another wet patch of forest floor with a spooky name. Julia even joked about sleeping closer to it, daring whatever spirits lurked to come tuck her in. We all laughed, even as the darkness pressed closer. The air grew chillier than expected for early autumn, and when I checked the thermometer on my pack, it read nearly 10 degrees lower than it had on the ridge. Still, we brushed it off. Mountain valleys could do that. We played cards, shared old hiking stories, and drifted off one by one, lulled by exhaustion and alcohol. Around midnight, I stirred awake briefly and heard Julia whispering. I thought she was talking in her sleep. I almost called out, then thought better of it and went back to sleep. I wish I hadn't. By dawn, Julia was gone. At first, we thought she'd wandered off to pee or catch the sunrise, typical Julia. But after 30 minutes of calling her name and circling the camp, worry began to set in. Her boots were still in the tent. So was her jacket. The ground around her sleeping bag was soaked darker than the rest, and there were smudges in the mud, like someone had dragged themselves out of the tent without standing. We followed the only visible trail, faint footprints, bare and oddly small, leading straight toward the hollow. They stopped at the edge. No prints turned back. No sign of slipping or falling. Just stopped, like she had stepped into the earth. The water in the hollow looked different now, less like a puddle, more like a shallow pool, clearer in the center. And there was something at the bottom, a scrap of fabric, red, Julia's bandana. I started to wade in, but Mark grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I did. A soft voice, far off, but unmistakable, singing. The same lullaby Julia had hummed the night before. But it wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from beneath the water. And then the wind picked up, and it sounded like sobbing. Mark and I stared at the water frozen. The bandana fluttered slightly below the surface, caught on something just out of reach. Against every instinct, I stepped into the hollow. The mud sucked at my boots, thick and cold, but I pushed forward until the water lapped at my waist. That's when I saw her. Julia just beneath the surface eyes, open hair fanned around her like dark seaweed. She wasn't floating. She was still as if held in place. Her mouth moved slowly like she was whispering. I dove forward, reaching out. My fingers brushed her hand, and then everything shifted. The mud beneath me gave way. The water pulled hard, not like a current, more like a hand. I gasped and kicked, but something had me, dragging, squeezing. I couldn't breathe. I opened my eyes underwater and saw them. Dozens of faces, pale and sunken, watching from the hollow floor. Children, women, men, all motionless, mouths open in silent song. Julia was among them, her eyes locked on mine. But behind her, something massive stirred. A shape without form, blacker than the depths, with too many limbs, and a face like twisted roots. It opened its maw, and the singing grew louder now inside my skull. I don't know how Mark pulled me out. I woke coughing on the shore, shaking muddy with blood dripping from my ears. Julia was gone. So was the bandana. The water had returned to black. But I swear the footprints had multiplied, leading out of the hollow now, all barefoot, all wet. We didn't speak the whole hike back, just walked fast and silent, like if we stopped, something might catch up. When we reached the ranger station, Mark tried to explain what happened, but the moment he mentioned the hollow, the ranger's face changed. "You camped there?" he asked, voice low. "That land's not on any park map for a reason. They sent a search team anyway. Found nothing. No sign of Julia, no footprints, not even our campfire remains. Just swampy ground and a chill that made their breath fog in the afternoon sun. I tried to sleep that night, but kept hearing singing soft and wet, like breath through water. I checked my hiking pack the next morning, and buried deep in a side pocket was something I hadn't packed. A single braid of Julia's hair tied with her red bandana, soaked through with river mud. It was still damp. Last night, I dreamt of the hollow. Except this time, I wasn't just standing at the edge. I was inside it, beneath the water, frozen like the others. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. And in front of me was Julia, smiling softly, her eyes milky and distant. She reached out and placed something in my hand. When I woke, my fist was clenched tight. I opened it to find a wet stone, smooth and cold, etched with my name. Just my first name. This morning, there were barefoot prints outside my apartment door. They were fresh, and they were facing inward. Story 9. The Inheritance Farm. My uncle died suddenly, and I inherited his old farm in rural Pennsylvania land. No one in the family had visited in decades. The house came with no keys, no deed, just a single note in his handwriting. "Don't go near the well. Ever." I laughed when I read it. Old farm superstition, I figured. But the first night I stayed there, I heard something scraping beneath the floorboards. Not mice, not pipes. It sounded like a voice muttering in a language I didn't recognize. The farm sat on 30 acres of overgrown fields and pine woods surrounded by rusted wire fence, and silence thick enough to press against your skin. The house itself was a sagging 2-story Victorian gray, with peeling paint, its windows clouded with grime. Inside it smelled of old earth, dry wood, and something faintly metallic, like blood left to dry in the sun. Most of the furniture had been covered in yellowed sheets, but the kitchen table was set for one, a fresh coffee cup still half full. The barn out back leaned like it was exhaling its final breath, and next to it stood the well-stone lined waist-high, with a warped wooden lid chained shut. I couldn't see the bottom, but standing near it made me dizzy, like gravity tilted inward. At night the fields were silent. No crickets, no wind. Just that feeling of being watched from every dark window and tree. And under the floorboards, the whispering continued low, rhythmic, like someone reciting a prayer beneath the house. I spent the first couple of days cleaning. Opened the windows, swept out mouse droppings, aired out the rooms, and even found some of my uncle's old journals. They were rambling but harmless, mostly entries about crops that never grew right and how the animals avoided the north field. I chalked it up to isolation, getting to him. I cooked simple meals on the old gas stove, drank a black coffee on the creaking porch swing, and tried to convince myself the place just needed life, breathed back into it. During the day, everything felt manageable, peaceful even. The sun filtered through the lace curtains in the parlor, birds chirped from deep in the trees, and I started to feel like I could maybe fix it up, make it mine. I avoided the well, sure, but more out of respect than fear. That first night, I slept with earplugs. No whispers, just dreams of digging, wet, cold soil, and something waiting beneath it. On the third night, I forgot the earplugs. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a dull rhythmic thud, like something knocking from beneath the floorboards under my bed. It came in sets of 3, then silence, then again. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the crawl space. Nothing, just dirt cobwebs and a strange rotting scent I hadn't noticed before. The next morning, I found the cellar door open. I hadn't touched it. The stairs down were damp and covered in muddy footprints, bare small ones like a child's. But I was alone. That night, I read more of my uncle's journals. One entry stood out. The well is not a hole, it's a mouth. It feeds when the ground is wet. I slammed the book shut. Rain was forecast for the next day. That evening, I heard it again, whispers under the floor clearer now. A woman's voice, repeating my name. I checked every window and door, locked them all tight. But as I walked past the parlor, I noticed something out the window movement by the well. A shape, small, pale, crouching on the edge. I blinked and it was gone. Just the wind, I told myself. Just the wind. It somehow sounded like it was breathing. The rain came heavy and fast that night, drumming against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. I couldn't sleep, too wired from the whispers and that strange figure by the well. Around midnight, the power cut out. The house went dark, the silence inside heavier than the storm outside. I lit a candle and checked every room just to reassure myself. That's when I heard the creak, slow, deliberate. The floorboard just outside my bedroom door. I froze. Then another. I stepped out into the hall, candle flickering, and followed the sound down the stairs across the living room. To the front door. It was wide open. Muddy footprints led inside, bare, small, soaking wet. They stopped at the cellar door. I should have run. But something pulled me forward. A need to know. I opened the door, descended the stairs, each step colder than the last. At the bottom, in the flickering candlelight, I saw the earthen wall had crumbled. Behind it was a tunnel narrow and freshly dug. And from its depths, the whisper came louder than ever. Come home. A pale hand reached out of the darkness, small clawed and twitching. I screamed and ran, tripping on the stairs, scraping my arm raw. As I fled past the well, I heard the lid thump open behind me. No wind this time, no excuses. Just something dragging itself out. I didn't stop running until I hit the tree line. I left everything behind, including the keys, including the farm. But I swear, as I looked back, the front door slowly closed itself. I sold the farm within a week's sight, unseen to a developer who didn't ask questions. I didn't go back, not even to collect my things. I sleep in hotels now, always on the second floor, never near basements or wooded areas. But it still finds me. Every time it rains, I hear knocking beneath my bed, 3 slow taps, and silence. I've moved cities twice, but the sound follows. Last night I found muddy footprints in my hallway again. Bare, small, leading from the bathroom drain. And on the mirror, written in condensation, the mouth is never full. This morning, I received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, the farmhouse porch, taken from a low angle, as if by something crawling. Standing on the steps was a child-sized figure, soaked, grinning, holding my old house keys. Scrawled on the bottom in the same handwriting as my uncle's note were 5 words: "It knows where you sleep." Story 10. The Fog That Watches. We were hiking the Olympic Peninsula, a dense stretch of moss-draped forest, where fog rolls in without warning. On our 3rd morning, it arrived just after dawn, so thick you couldn't see 5 feet ahead. But this fog wasn't silent. It hissed like a slow breath drawn through teeth. We called out to each other, laughing at first, until Lucas stopped answering. I followed the sound of his voice deeper into the gray, only to find his footprints, circling the same tree over and over. And they were still warm. The Hoh rainforest had always fascinated us, ancient, dripping alive with green shadows. We planned the trip for months, just 3 of us off-grid for a week. No cell service, no distractions. The first 2 days were pure magic sunlight, piercing through the thick canopy elk in the distance, the soft hush of moss underfoot. Our camp sat beside a slow-moving stream with fallen logs, forming natural benches and a ring of stones for our fire. But on the 3rd morning, the atmosphere changed. The fog rolled in without warning, thick, wet, heavy. It clung to our faces and clothes, deadening sound and blurring the world into pale gray. Trees disappeared just feet away, and the birds fell silent. We assumed it was coastal weather playing tricks, but something felt off. The fog wasn't drifting or rising. It was settling, almost crawling across the ground like a living thing. When I looked behind me, I noticed something strange. Our footprints had vanished, not just blurred, gone completely, as if the fog was eating them. That's when Lucas called out a single word. Guys from somewhere ahead. His voice sounded too far and too close. At the same time, before the fog, everything had gone according to plan. We hiked 6 miles in on day 1, pitched camp near the river bend, where the old growth trees curved like cathedral arches. Lucas brought his usual camera gear, snapping moss-draped branches and fallen logs like a man on assignment. Jen kept a meticulous journal, sketching ferns and jotting bird calls. I handled meals and firewood, happy to unplug from city noise. We told stories by firelight, passed around trail whiskey, and joked about Bigfoot and forest spirits. It was peaceful, grounding, the kind of quiet that soothes your bones. Even when the fog first crept in that morning, we didn't panic. We marked our location on GPS, stuck close, called out every few steps. Lucas walked ahead, scouting the trail like usual. We were used to him doing that. The plan was to break camp late and hike out to the next site. But by mid-morning, we realized we hadn't moved. The forest around us hadn't changed. Every turn, every tree identical. And Lucas still hadn't come back. Jen and I started calling for Lucas more urgently. The fog swallowed our voices, muffling them to a strange underwater echo. No birds, no wind, no, just the hiss of moisture brushing past our ears like whispers we couldn't quite catch. We followed what we thought was his trail, but every direction looked the same. Moss on every trunk, the same split log half buried in ferns, the same gnarled tree that looked like it was watching. That's when Jen pointed at the ground. "These are our prints," she whispered. We'd been walking in circles. I pulled out my compass. It spun wildly, clicking like something inside it was broken. Jen's journal, which she'd tucked under her jacket, was soaked, but only the latest page. The rest was bone dry. That fresh page had new writing, not hers. It said, "Stay still. It sees movement." Jen hadn't written it. Neither had I. That's when the smell hit wet earth, and something metallic sharp. Blood. We turned to find a trail of crimson droplets leading from behind a tree. Small at first, then larger. Jen reached out to touch one, but I grabbed her hand. We heard it then, footsteps. Just ahead. Slow. Too heavy to be Lucas, but too light to be a bear. We crouched behind a fallen log, barely breathing, and watched a shadow pass between trees, human-shaped, but wrong. It shimmered slightly, as if made of fogs itself. And then it turned no eyes, but we felt it see us. That was the first time Jen cried. Quiet, shaking like a hunted animal. I grabbed Jen's hand and ran. We didn't speak, didn't plan, just sprinted blindly through the fog, ducking branches, slipping on moss, tearing through ferns. The forest blurred into a smear of gray and green, but I swear the fog moved with us, adjusting its grip, thickening where we tried to go, loosening when we turned away. It was hurting us. I realized that too late. We burst into a clearing I didn't recognize. No trail markers, no familiar trees. Just a wide circle of flattened earth, dead and gray, with that same metallic scent thick in the air. In the center stood Lucas. At least, it looked like him. But his skin was too pale, his eyes wrong, glassy, blank, like mirrors. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, just a hiss like the fog itself. Jen screamed. I stepped forward, yelling his name, but he didn't blink, didn't move. Then he lifted his hand and pointed behind us. I turned. The fog wasn't mist anymore. It had form humanoid, massive, faceless. It hovered just feet away, arms, two long torso unraveling into tendrils of mist that pulsed and coiled. And I understood. It didn't hunt us. It made us lost, stripped our direction, erased our trails, fractured our senses. That was its feeding ground. Confusion was the trap. Jen fell to her knees, sobbing. The thing moved closer, slow and soundless. Lucas, whatever was wearing him, whispered, "One stays, one leaves." I didn't know what it meant until Jen grabbed my pack and shoved me. "Go," she said. "Don't look back." And I ran. Through the clearing, into the trees. And behind me, silence swallowed her scream. I ran until the fog thinned, until trees looked unfamiliar, in the right way, new, not looping. When I finally stumbled onto a ranger trail, my lungs were raw, my hands trembling. A rescue team found me hours later, dehydrated and shaking. I told them about Jen and Lucas. They searched for 4 days, found nothing. No tracks, no campsite, not even our fire ring. Just a single page from Jen's journal, nailed to a tree clean dry with a message in that same unfamiliar handwriting, the fog keeps what it likes. They chalked it up to exposure hallucinations trauma. I let them. But some mornings, I wake to find condensation on my windows, spelling out my name. And sometimes on cold days when the air gets still, I hear a voice behind me whisper, "Stay still." It sees movement. Last week, I got a package with no return address. Inside was Jen's journal, every page intact, bone dry. But the last entry wasn't in her handwriting. It simply read, "One left. One still walks." Taped to the final page was a photo taken in the fog. It showed me standing alone in the clearing, mouth open, mid-scream, arms outstretched like I was pleading. But I never saw a camera. Never stood like that. And in the photo's background, half shrouded, was me again watching, smiling. Just before the fog covered everything. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.